welcome to our webinar with the Society for the Advancement of Consulting and APICS or ASCM Inland Empire Chapter, Inland Southern California region. We're happy to have you joining us today with our panel discussions on the challenges of integrating technology across the supply chain. There is definitely a lot to discuss. I'm going to introduce our panel briefly, and then we can, they can always add some flavor into the conversation and we'll just get started. So I'm Lisa Anderson. I'm the co-executive director of the Society for Advancement of Consulting, and I'm also president of the ASCM Inland Southern California chapter. And in my day job, I'm also president of LMA Consulting Group, working with manufacturers and distributors to grow their business profitably and successfully with superior customer service. And I have with us today Diane Garcia from Lorraine Consulting, and she is from Portland, Oregon currently. And by the way, I am from Southern California in that area. And Diane is also a manufacturing and supply chain expert with quite a bit of history in the aerospace field, but has branched out into many other industries since then. And she's been consulting for the last 6 years or so. We also have with us David Ogilvie from Brisbane, Australia. He is an expert in ERP systems and, of course, supply chain as well. Really can't be one without the other. And he has many, many years of experience in consulting, actually, as well as I think, didn't you grow up in the manufacturing industry early on, right, David?
Certainly had our own business. That's right, Lisa.
That's what I thought. So I didn't want to say that if it wasn't true, but I thought so. And then Dr. Karen Wilson Starks is from Colorado. She is an expert in organizational development and on the people side of the equation, but she works with construction related firms and manufacturing firms and has a great deal of experience as it relates to supply chain, and her clients are certainly experiencing those issues, and she's helping to navigate them as the people side of the equation is very prevalent, as well as with our today's topic of technology. Actually, I guess with Karen, I'll turn it to you because I don't actually know enough of your history to say what you did prior to consulting, but I know you've been consulting for as long as I've known you, which is many years. So I'll turn it over to you and to add that flavor, and then we'll maybe just talk to one issue you see clients experiencing with technology, Karen, and then you'll get us kicked off that way.
Sure, no problem. Let me just mention that I'm president and CEO of Trends Leadership Incorporated, and my company's been in existence for about 27 years. I work mostly with large global corporations, typically US-based, but not always. And I've been in the consulting world for more than 30 years, quite a bit. Prior to that, I was also in a variety of private practices as a psychologist. And prior to that, I was active duty in the Army as an Army psychologist. So I've been around for a long time. My career in psychology goes past 40 years at this point. So what I'm seeing with my clients when I'm thinking about manufacturing and construction, first, let me just mention what's the challenge when systems are not integrated and the cause of it. What I see is that a lot of times companies, as they're growing, they piece together different systems so that the different parts of the business, it might be what I call the silos, could be HR, could be finance, could be sales. They all have a different way of using technology. And the technology systems don't always communicate or speak well to one another. And so therefore, there's not transparency between those systems. They've had to piece them together as they grow. And then they get to a certain point where they're large enough, big enough, they need something completely different in order to be more efficient, because what happens now is they're wasting a lot of time trying to make an old system work, and it requires a lot of manual labor. And in today's market, you really can't be that inefficient You're going to waste a lot of time that you really need for innovation and serving the client's needs. So I'll stop there to say that's a
Well,
good bit of what I see. So.
well, my goodness, Karen, you certainly have, like, it's as if you were trying to set us up, because I know David, Diane, and I have do a lot with ERP systems, and by all means, that's a prevalent problem. So, Diane, I'm going to ask you, because I know you have an example you can talk to of a client that we've been working with together, and then I'm sure David has a million examples from that point of view, although we don't want to spend all the time talking about problems. We also want to talk about solutions, but maybe you could even stick to that, Diane. I know we're working with a client that has, strangely enough, 2 large systems that they're working with, if
I was
at a
just going to
minimum.
say, pick the client and pick the challenge, because there are, the data may be challenging, the systems and separate systems is always challenging, but to the point that Lisa's referring to is, yeah, this particular client has part of their business in one system, a very large known system, and they do all their quoting and sales kind of functions within that side. And then they have their ERP system, which obviously helps on the operational and the manufacturing and the accounting and finance end of things. And it's all separate. And so trying to meld these 2 systems together is always a challenge, and the data within them, and what status of the order or the quote has taken place. Is it still a quote? Have we won that quote? Is it now an order? And which dollars are where? So it's always a complicated question. And you would think in 2022 we wouldn't be going through these challenges, but we definitely are. And I know a lot of people probably in the attendees list are dealing with these similar concepts here.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that, because we work with clients that are smaller family-owned businesses, and we work with clients that are multi-billion dollars across companies. I mean, across countries and continents. And I would tell you that big or small, many have this same problem. And why do we care? The reason we care is that, especially in today's world, if you cannot understand what your future demand is going to look like, as an example, and figure out what that means and how do you get plan for the appropriate capacity and the way to deliver that demand successfully, let alone profitably, you have a big problem on your hands. And that's just one of the issues. So David, what do you see on your side? I can only imagine that.
Something very similar, Lisa, in the fact that Karen mentioned before about a whole series of different applications being bought. There have been a number of my clients who have sort of isolated little issues that they wanted to solve, and they've gone and subscribed to some little SaaS system that does a particular thing, and then they grow like what we call in Australia, grow like Topsy. They just keep adding all of these little pieces together, and there's been no real overarching strategic view about how technology is going to be deployed in the business. And so with one of the things that I offer my clients, of course, is that if you're looking at deploying technology in any shape or form, it's take a step back in many ways and look at the strategic view of where the business is and where it's going to be. Because while we need to solve today's problems, investing in technology really is a strategic initiative, and you've got to be able to buy something and build something and develop and deploy something that's going to serve the business in 5 or 10 or 15 years' time. And so that strategic view is something that I miss all the time. And Diane mentioned the data, and a lot of the challenges in integrating technology across the supply chain. So that's across the different participants, not only just within your own business, but with your suppliers and with your customers and so forth. It's those data sets and the APIs in today's language that will help facilitate that. But like everything with technology, the devil is in the detail. Right? And it is all too often that the detail is not surfaced early enough. As an example, I had a client recently where we were looking at integrating an ERP system with another add-on system from one of the suppliers and so forth. Everybody was talking about how we were going to do it by APIs. That was our preferred method of integration or all that sort of stuff. But the devil in the detail was the data set we needed was not available through an API. So an API had not been developed to expose that data set to the world. So, you know, there's a myriad of issues that we need to look at to successfully integrate that technology across supply chains.
It's absolutely true, and one of the things that I found is that understand, you know, it seems like a topic that you might want to assign, if you will, to your technical leader or to your you know, to a planner or to somebody. It depends on what the issue is, but don't. I mean, you might want to involve those folks, but you cannot afford to lose this information, because what I'm seeing is across the board clients, no matter how good they are, and some of them are better than others as far as their data and their ability to utilize systems to work in their business, is they don't necessarily, there's always some issue, like they're capturing data incorrectly, and then they're making decisions based on that data, and they're actually running down the freeway going the wrong direction, if you will. And this is like, these are companies that are not tiny, so it's important to make sure that you get the right people together, and that you really address at least the 80-20. Like, don't get so mired up in details that you never make any decisions, because that's worse. But on the other hand, running down the freeway in the wrong direction is not going to help you. So it's very important to at least like pick out the key information, and get the experts working on it. Diane, I think there's been a recent project where there was data issues, right? And it shows it absolutely would make the wrong decisions as far as which customers to prioritize based on profit.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what everyone has said, is that you don't have all the information in one easy, understandable format, and so therefore you're making incorrect decisions based off of incorrect data. The point I wanted to add, based off of what David and Lisa has said, is that, you know, a lot of the clients that I do enjoy working with, or that are really tackling this, because like she said, you don't want to get so sucked into all the details and feel overwhelmed that you can't make any moves forward. But at the same time, you really have to start somewhere. And I think the best clients, or the most successful clients, are those who start early, who are taking the time to dabble in the details and you know, understand where information resides, and do we have it? If we don't have it, how do we create it? And spending the quality time cross-functionally to figure all of that out. Otherwise, you know, you, like Lisa said, you're going to make wrong decisions, or you're going to head in the wrong direction, and then realize, you know, a year and a half down the road that perhaps, you know, that supplier was actually reliable, or that customer was profitable or not profitable. You know, you might have some different information later down the road. So I think starting early and getting the right people together is always what helps projects be successful.
Let me add something else in here, which is maybe a little bit of a metaphor, perhaps, for what we're talking about. One analogy that comes to mind is farming.
Uh-oh. We lost Karen's analogy. So when Karen comes back, we will I
thought it might have been my connection.
Farm early on in the day, round and
Karen,
did I disappear? Now. Okay.
Yeah, you did. Right at an important point, so you may have to repeat what you said.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know. So I'm doing a farm analogy, and I'm saying when you have a small farm and you're doing the work, you might be working on your own out there in the fields, and you might be doing a lot by hand. And that's what you can afford at the time. And your farm is small enough, you can get away with it. Then eventually you upgrade to, let's say, a mule. You got one mule and you're plowing and you're operating that way. And you might add another mule. At a point, you realize the mules are really not enough. You're going to have to go to a tractor and maybe some other heavy equipment and so on. And you're investing more. Then I think David's point is really important. At some point, you have to rise above it at a strategic level and say, what kind of investment do we need to make now, which may be very different than what you've tried already and what you've already implemented, because you need something completely different so that the machines do what they can do best and free up your people to do what they do best. You don't want your people wasting a lot of time doing what the machines could do that would save time and make it more efficient and actually rest their bodies and minds for the greater work that you want them to do. So that's kind of the analogy that I would paint out there about why this is important.
And Karen, that is a really important point, because a number of my clients, well, certainly before COVID, were in Asia. And so a lot of those Asian countries were not looking at technology per se because they could just throw more people at it. But they are getting to a point now where that's not sufficient. And they need to start looking at that. So, for anybody that's got a presence in Asia, now is the time for that strategic review to start happening, because Asia is going to be moving forward in that space.
Well, and the other thing I would add to what Karen just said, because it's a great analogy, is that as you start to add the plows or whatever it is to your equation, how you handle the data and your processes change, or they should change with it. And you maybe the way you're capturing the data as you're just walking around with two mules could be very different, and you will make bad decisions if you keep the same data coming. Even though it will come, you will start making bad decisions. So it's important that as much as you have to plan for the future and get that, your new systems in place or technology in place, you also have to plan for how you're going to get information out of those systems to be successful and think ahead. And then when David said, go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say, and I was going to tie that into Alfred's question, because he's talking about analytics and reporting. For me, it is really important, if we're looking at the analytics and so forth, that we build those with the right, using the right methodologies and the right purposes in mind. All too often we have these analytics or benchmarks or KPIs or whatever it is that we're measuring and we're drawing out of the data that are in reinforcing poor behaviour. Now, I spoke recently at another webinar where I was talking about Wells Fargo, for example, right? They were using the number of new accounts as the measure that they were analysing the business by, and the end result of that, of course, was very poor behaviour. In fact, illegal behaviour and criminal behaviour, and that's had a major impact. So for me, that analytics piece is really important to have early, again in that strategic review piece, because it's more about the behaviours that you want occurring in your business. And that's what the benchmark should be built on. So you look at the behaviours you're trying to reinforce and to have in your business, work out how to measure them, then work out what data you need to do that, and then build the analytics around that.
I agree. And I would also add to that conversation that actually the business intelligence type softwares are very affordable. So you really shouldn't prevent even the smallest of companies from moving forward. However, you can use old-fashioned ways of getting data out of your system and cleansing it. So, for example, with one client, we built a data model, which is really just a fancy Excel model that ties data together. And what we found is that we could have had all sorts of fancy tools in place, and it would have just given them very wrong information quicker. So some of it is how do you go through and at least cleanse or make sure that you're adding apples with apples together instead of apples and oranges and thinking you're going to get some sort of an apple. So you have to, look at those types of pieces, and then you add the tools into the mix as well. But I also agree that you should look at this ahead of time, because what's the point of doing all these transactions other than the fact that you have to invoice people? That's obviously important. But aside from that, you're going to make decisions, and you have to make decisions with data. So you better be paying attention to your data.
Well, and on that point, then that's getting back to the theme of what today's about, and that's that integrating across the supply chain. You are making decisions based on data that may not be yours to have in the first place. And the key to that then is making sure that the information you're getting from your suppliers and information that you're getting from your customers and so forth is available, useful, and those sorts of things.
want to
And
add
clean.
another part
And you
about,
can't control the cleanliness of their data. Sorry.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Karen.
I was going to add another piece about this that relates to the people part, which is that you have to decide, who needs to see what data. And what I mean by that is sometimes systems are built, multiple people need to access and see the data, but they don't have a line of sight to it. So you have to build the system in such a way that everyone that needs to touch it, everyone that needs to be aware of it can have access, which gets to another point, which is you can be very sophisticated in what kind of systems you build. However, if the people in the company don't understand how to use the systems, then you're wasting money there too, because you've got all of this sophistication. Nobody knows how to use it. And I find that many companies don't think about this ahead of time. So it's kind of like what happens in mergers and acquisitions. They'll make a decision based on the numbers on the front end, which makes sense. These two businesses should merge or somehow come together and bring their different synergies. And it sounds good, but you've got to think about how are you going to integrate those companies? How will they work together culturally? The same thing is true when it comes down to integrating systems. You've got to put in the equation, how will we train the people? How will they get up to speed on this? Multiple ways of training people because they have different ways of thinking and different ways of operating, and not everyone is going to learn in the same way. Skip that part and you invest multi-millions of dollars, all to no avail.
And they also have different systems in most cases, and there's very little thought often given in those M&A sort of discussions and decisions around how do we bring these two systems together? Which system works for both companies? There are the additional costs of combining and consolidating that information from a reporting perspective that is not included in the cost calculations. The ERP discussions are often left out of those M&A sort of discussions. And, I've been very fortunate enough to be called in on a couple of occasions with M&A people to help them diagnose, what the landscape is and how they need to move forward with that sort of thing. But that's a really important point.
Absolutely. I mean, in my career prior to consulting, we started off with quite the mess because we did consolidate 3 businesses into one, and we had to, consolidate it into one system. But it's more than consolidating into a system. It's not a technical. It's not solely a technical piece. It's actually. And it's not really a training piece. It's not, typically speaking, I find that it's not as though my clients don't know, push this button here, or do this there. What the problem is that they don't know how to transfer their day-to-day process and how they ended up shipping an order to customer X in a particular way that customer X wanted it, on the timeframes required and in the right packaging, if you will, or whatever the nuances were. They didn't know how to do that in the new system, which is different from training, because that you could tell them how to push go as many times as you want. They won't get the answer they need. So that's what I find. I mean,
and
go ahead, David.
That's one of the little secret sources, I guess, to the implementation work that I do with my clients, because building capability is really important for me. Now, the software vendor or a system integrator or software partner, whichever one you're using to help you deploy these sorts of systems, they're very much what I call checkbox project management and implementation. Yes, we've given you a training session, but has the knowledge been transferred? That's the really key piece. Can these people not only just tick the boxes and press the buttons in the right way, but do they understand under the hood how it hangs together and why this piece of information is important and who else it affects in the business? It's that building that capability is a really, really important component to get these things right, because, Lisa and Diane, we both know 85% of these things fail unless they're done properly. And
absolutely.
And this is one of the reasons why.
And it's really
Absolutely
all
true.
of the things that you're talking about, because as simple as it might sound about pushing the button, a lot of my clients are stuck at pushing the button.
Yeah.
Because
They do
I
not
mean,
know how to push the button.
I'm
Or
serious.
they push it all sorts of times, and then havoc ensues because like who knows what the button is doing.
Right.
So I'm going to start to answer this question, and Diane, I'll have you, as I know that you can answer part of it, and then I have definitely an answer to the rest. So Alfred's asking, like, can we talk a little bit more about the culture aspect and how customers should evaluate the cultural fit of these system integrators, like the ERP suppliers and partners? So that's one piece of it, but I was also thinking about like, how do you prepare for that? And actually, given the fact that we're on an ASCM webinar, Diane, can you talk to, I know that we've suggested that clients go through some of the education and training because it's a nice foreground, but can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, like she said, we do have within the ASCM body of knowledge, there's quite a bit of, I guess, detail or foundation around all of this topic. But I think when you're in ERP and you're trying to figure out how to evaluate your systems, what I find is that you're really trying to figure out how does your team use the system and what do you need out of the system? What does your process support? Your system? Does it support what you need from the business? And I was going to make this comment earlier. I know Karen used her farm analogy. I would use that a lot of the times in ERP selection or, whatever supply chain related project I'm working with clients on. It's kind of like a video game, the video games where you have a map and the map is mostly dark because you haven't been in that area yet and you just know what pieces you've explored. And as you start to explore more, the map becomes more available to you. And I think a lot of the time, I think Alfred asked a question, is the reporting an afterthought? No, I think the tools and the reporting are understood that you have this output of the system. But do you know what you need in between? But it's kind of foggy, it's dark, when we haven't got there yet. So you really need the cross-functional teams. You really need to do the process mapping. You really need to know, like Karen mentioned, how to use the system. It's not just about clicking the button, but how do we use it today so that we know that in the future, we know what we need out of it. So it's kind of documentation, but beyond just, we do step A, B, and C. It's what do we need out of the system to be able to be successful? And then you can kind of go from there.
Well, and so like adding to that, and then David, I'm sure you have things to add here, is that if you think about it going into the system integration, you really should be thinking about doing something like getting folks up to speed on like the APICS fundamental body of knowledge, because really it's how every ERP system works. And so having that understanding will go a long way. It'll at least give them a base. Otherwise, people can be very clueless, and that's not helpful, obviously. And then from there, what Diane was saying, understanding your current processes is another key aspect. From a partner point of view, like in our ERP selection type projects, the key is which part. I mean, every ERP partner is somewhat, I always call them sharks. They are all sharks. I mean, it is the way it is. So they're out for the sale. However, some of them are more focused on the long-term sale, and other ones are focused more on like the shorter-term sale. Either strategy is okay, but for my clients, I'm interested in the longer-term approach where they're thinking, how do I get live successfully? Which means those partners have people who have more experience in the business. And so they know they help you avoid the traps of going down like, here's how you use the software, just set it up this way. And then, your business doesn't work that way and you have to find a solution outside of it. So it's finding a partner. It's all about the partner in that. Well, a little about the software, because you have to have, like, if you're in a process industry and then you're working with a job shop software, that's problematic, obviously, and vice versa. And that's not the only distinction. There are many, but that's the software side. But even if you get the right software, if you have a partner that doesn't really understand the business processes, you're going to be in trouble. And so that's what I find. And David, I mean, I know you work with clients in the topic.
And that's one of the reasons Alfred's question is quite topical and very important in many ways, because it's one of the reasons why I actually built my proprietary software selection methodology, because many of my competitors, at least in my marketplace, don't look at the cultural side of things. They are all very functionally focused. They'll provide software vendors with a big long list of Excel, in an Excel document full of different functional requirements, saying, "Can you do this and can you do this?" Well, the reality is the software vendors are just going to tick them all and say yes. So it absolutely adds no value whatsoever. And one of the reasons I do things differently is because that cultural fit is really, really important. And I've built some things into my methodology that help flush out that cultural fit and an analysis piece. So it's about, Alfred's question was, how should customers evaluate that cultural fit? One of the things I do to help do that is I put you two together, and I facilitate conversations prior to the point of vendors actually responding to your RFP or whatever requirements document that you've given to them. It's about making that decision. Is this person, are these people trustworthy? Do they speak my language? When I ask them questions, do they answer or ask more important and more knowledgeable questions? These sorts of things can help you understand whether they are a good cultural fit or not. In fact, that facilitation piece that I do with my clients, we actually score that. So I've got some well-targeted questions that they actually have to answer at the end of that. And I've got a couple of reference videos on my website now that are, the guys, when I was walking them through the process, were a little skeptical about how important this was. But fortunately, once they've got to the other end and they see the impact of those conversations that we had together and the time that they committed to making that happen. Because let's be frank, culture takes time. I think Karen will agree with that, right? So you need to invest the time to get the culture right. And the culture is probably a little more important than the functionality in the software. Because at the end of the day, these are the people you are going to war with. You are actually in the field working hard with them. These projects never go smoothly completely. So there will be times when there's tension. There will be times when there's disagreement. And you need to make sure that the people you are working with in that environment are culturally aligned with you, to make sure, otherwise it could become acrimonious very, very quickly.
Good point, David. It does make the success of, is your partner, are you working successfully with your partner? And it'll get tough. And the closer you go to go live and implementation of these things, you want to make sure that you have the right team around you.
I want to just say something else about this as well. I love what you said about the conversations that are important. And I would add this piece. The conversations are ongoing throughout the entire process. Yes, on the front end, to make sure you have the right partners, to make sure they're communicating. And as you're implementing, you have to continue communicating. There are always adjustments. There are always changes and updates and deeper learning as you go along, and transfer of new knowledge and information. So if you stop communicating, then you stop having your systems work effectively for you. So it's really learning to continue that deep level of communication throughout, so that you're constantly learning and growing together and maximally using what you've purchased.
Absolutely. I would say, like David, I mean, the good news here is that the reason we're all so in lockstep agreement is that you're dealing with the top global consultants in the world, and especially related to this topic. So you're attending the right webinar today, as far as it relates to ERP, and we'll expand here in a second. But I would just, everything David said is exactly right. You have to be looking at that ahead of time. With that said, what Karen just said is really important, because I would say that, I don't even know, probably 100% of the clients that are calling on the process side. So there's two sides to the business, at least from my point of view. There's ERP selection, which we've been talking about here. And then there's like how do we upgrade the process to achieve a more profitable or improvements in service, those types of aspects. And 100% of those projects relate back to the use of technology as well. So it's once you go live, you're how do I get to the next level of how do I use this software? Because I've invested, who knows how much money, but many times it could be $1 million. Depends on the size of company, but either way, it's going to be 100,000 to multiple millions, most likely. And so how do you, just going live is not enough. So how do I better utilize this software to grow the business?
It's just the beginning.
It's just the beginning. How do I scale
find out
it?
more and more even afterwards. Yeah.
So,
the end of the beginning.
The end of the beginning, exactly. And that might lead us into some of the other technology topics. So, there's what I'm calling related software or peripheral software, but it could be warehouse management systems, or it could be forecasting systems, or it could be like IoT. And maybe you have, where you're tracking your production, your machines, and how the machines are performing, and then you're bringing that data back. That could be like an IoT application. There's David or Diane.
Yeah, that's really important.
What ones pop to your mind?
Yeah, that's really important, Lisa, because particularly when we're talking in an environment where, there are political tensions around the world at the moment, right? And so a lot of companies are re-examining their supply chains and reshoring and bringing manufacturing back to your home country, and those sorts of things are really important. Well, the reasons why they went over there in the first place, obviously, in many cases, was the low labour costs. So by bringing that back, you are risking a higher labour cost. So a lot of companies are looking at how they can use robotics either in their factory floor or, as you mentioned, in the warehousing and those sorts of things. So that industrial Internet of Things is becoming much, much more important to be able to leverage that reshoring of things. And so, yes, I think that's one of the next best things. That is one of the next things that's coming along down the pipeline. I think is a lot of companies are currently looking at robotics and how they can automate a lot of those things. But the other thing you mentioned before about forecasting, some companies have got different forecasting tools, depending on which application you use. Some of them have got ISV partner software that plugs straight in and does the forecasting. But it's how you then get the data from your customers, because that's that visibility. In my supply chain models, one of the two key components of that is the visibility and velocity of information and material. Right? So how do we improve the visibility further down the chain? So, your customer's customer, how do we get that level of information? And likewise down your suppliers, how do we get that information? And technology really is going to be the only way to be able to do that, unless you're going to have somebody on the phone for an awful long time, and that's going to be costly. So the other next steps is, yes, the internet, the industrial Internet of Things, plus the API pieces about being able to get information out of other systems so that it improves that visibility and it improves the velocity at which you get that information.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point, because there is one of the key programs I've seen clients be extremely successful with, and especially in today's world, is my clients, if you will, are planning for what their customers should store in their locations to support the next level customer. So how do we do that? Like David said, oftentimes there's additional software that you can bring software on. Let's just say we're the company. So let's just say we're supplying Walmart. Just because it's an easy example. So we say, how do we figure out what Walmart needs in which location so that they can best support the customers that show up at their stores? I mean, the good news about Walmart is we're just one step to the end customer, but you may have multiple steps. So how do you get that data? And oftentimes it could be through EDI. Maybe it's already set up. It could be through APIs, like David was talking earlier. It could just be in spreadsheets. I have customers that get it in spreadsheets, but if you can take that data into account, in your planning processes and your forecasting processes. Your customers are saving significant amounts in terms of their manufacturing costs, their transportation costs, their warehousing costs. I mean, it just all across the board. And more importantly, their service and lead times to the customers. Diane, what do you have you seen?
I
that
was just
process?
going to add, I mean, I think the reason companies are focusing on technology like a forecasting system is because they're just trying to understand what their customers want and what expectations, do they have. But an additional technology that I would add to that would be a CRM program. So my picture on my wall happened to fall down here. Is a CRM program. So we had a client, I don't know, maybe right as the pandemic took start, or maybe a 6 months after, really interested in how their customer was thinking and how they were going to be able to download insights on their website about what types of products they found to be, the most as interested in, and how did they take that information and say, okay, how do we have what types of products, what colors of things that are most popular? How do we have that in the places we need? How did they learn about their customers? How do they upsell to their customers? So there's a lot of clients that we work who are really interested in how does the customer, want to see products online? How do they, what are the most popular products online? So of course we want to forecast those things, but we also need to get insight around it through these CRM programs that we can integrate and install.
That would be a really good point.
Yeah. And then I think the other one I always talk about is BI or business intelligence tools, because right now it seems to be a pretty affordable solution to get some pretty cool insights into the company and into your customers, and how do you make decisions off of it. But I will say that, like Lisa mentioned or David mentioned earlier, you can have all these fancy softwares, but unless you have them set up and they're giving you the right information, it doesn't matter. You could use Excel.
And your people know how to use them. That's exactly right.
Exactly.
I'm going to add something else to that too. Not only your people knowing how to use it, I think it's important to talk about accountabilities. Who is responsible for checking and monitoring what? Where I've seen a lot of failures is that, you get all the right technology, you're getting the right information coming in. However, there are a lot of assumptions maybe internally in the organization about who's going to be doing what, and then nobody does it. So you're not benefiting from it. So again, there's the communication piece, but it's all around who's responsible. And not only if I gather the information and if I'm analyzing it, who do I then disseminate it to? Who else needs it? So there's that sort of like chain that goes along the way. And people don't always, this isn't obvious to them. They don't always think about it. So it's one of the things that has to be talked about.
It's
100%.
It's absolutely true. It's earlier today, we were on a call with a client, and we had this actually very successful program where we're moving certain product lines from make to order to make to stock in a location. They had record-breaking sales, record-breaking production. We stabilized the production schedule, and everything was lovely. They ran out of space, so we were like moving, finding additional space so that they could, they don't have much space to begin with, but so that they could better serve customers that are located in Canada, etc. And then when like the process fell apart because the item wasn't fully set up, if you will, in one location, and then like the people shipping it just decided to take it off of the order instead of like alerting folks. So I mean, to your point about communication, Karen, it's like this elaborate process was fully functional and successful, and then it got derailed by some minor matter that should have been communicated properly
by human behavior.
By human behavior.
Yes.
Exactly.
Back to that.
Funnily enough, though, with all of the disruption that's happening in the supply chains at the moment, I'm also thinking the one elephant we haven't talked about is the visibility of the material in transit. So I think there's there's a really big opportunity here for freight forwarding companies and those sorts of organisations to help their customers by making that visibility, that information more visible, is probably what I'm really trying to say. So integration with freight forwarders. So, okay, it's all well and good to say, okay, the Port of Long Beach has got how many days delay now, Lisa, because you're closer to that than I am, but it's 20,
still significant,
whatever, right. So we're talking about a month or more.
Yeah.
So communicating where your goods are is a really important piece, I think, because going back to the customer, if I want to talk to my customers and become a reliable supplier to my customers, my ability to be able to tell them where their goods are and when we can expect them is a really important component to that relationship with your customers.
Yeah,
and that's why
you're
I think
totally right.
That's the elephant in the room at the moment for me, is because that's a big missing piece.
Well, so we were just we had the first part of this series was related to the EU and North America, but there happened to be ports and logistics experts on that webinar. And so there are some tools that are being developed, unfortunately, in a silo. That's bad. But there are tools being developed, like, for example, for the LA port, and then there's a separate tool for the Long Beach port. I mean, that's the issue here. We have to get people looking together across companies and across like partners in the supply chain, because there's the ports, there's brokers, there's the container vessels, to your point, when you're looking at it that way. So there are some initiatives, but David's absolutely correct. Like, what I would always say with clients is like, when you start to get so sophisticated, we can't figure this out, let's go back to square one and call and say, what is on X container? We type it in a spreadsheet. We do something to figure out what is coming. And then you can usually do something to gain visibility in your system. If you can get the information from someone somewhere, you can find a way to gain visibility in your system. The other thing, though, when you brought up in transit, David, it was like brilliance, really, because the other thing I would say is a washout is even global clients, like unrelated to port issues. There are so many problems with in transit just among locations that are serving customers in the United States, or United States and Canada is like a particularly big problem because they're intercompany and like they've implemented the system backwards and like who knows what they're doing to get the product across the border, and the systems are not in sync. So it's definitely a problem, and there are some really easy solutions to North American cross-border type in transit problems, although 80% of our clients, I think, have them, but they don't have to be sophisticated tech.
It doesn't have to be sophisticated tech. You're 100% right. It can be sometimes simplistic. And I guess to leverage then Dr. Lewis's question around blockchain, I must admit, I'm going to put my hand up and say I have a bias is the wrong word, but I have a fairly firm view around blockchain and how it's going to work with ERP systems and supply chain. My personal opinion at the moment, and I'm hopeful people will prove me wrong, but I think blockchain has become one of the hyped words out there. I am yet to see a practical deployment of a working blockchain arrangement. Now, in Australia, for example, our Australian Stock Exchange, so that's basically the Australian version of the Dow Jones or the NASDAQs and so forth, their trading platform is in the process of going to blockchain. Now, that project is been delayed 6 years.
6 years, that's crazy.
It has cost more than $450 million or values in that, and they still have not got a working prototype properly to be deployed. So I've got to be honest, my personal opinion is if blockchain was going to make the big impact that it spoke about, all of the massive impact that these smart contracts and non-fudgeable tokens and things were going to bring to the table, if that was going to have the impact that it's supposed, it would be starting to make an impact now. Now, my
Well, I
personal
think-
view is
Go ahead.
blockchain is a solution that's looking for a problem to solve.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with David. What I would tell you, because I've, from being involved in Southern California's supply chain industry, there is a lot of conversations about blockchain. I would say the more progressive clients that are supply chain experts find it exciting technology. That I would tell you. And on the other side of things, the ports are all for blockchain, because I think when you deal with multiple parties and you have to figure out who owns what and who took possession of what, there's advantages. However, the big problem with blockchain, which is where I agree with David, is that getting all those people to work together, whether it's blockchain or anything else, is the problem. Because each company is not incented to invest in some other company's success by giving them visibility, or they might not even want to give them visibility, which is the issue, because suddenly everyone can see it, which is the advantage, but it's also the disadvantage if you're one of those players and you don't want to give up your edge. So getting everybody to work together is the problem. So like the people like FedEx, Maersk, all these big people are continuing to pour millions of dollars into it. So eventually something will work out. But in the foreseeable future, it is not going to solve your problem. That's
100%.
basically my opinion.
Yeah,
I'm wondering
I
if
wasn't
it could be-
criticizing the technology. It's just
Yeah.
technology really should be for a business outcome, in my view, not for the technology's sake. And all I've seen so far is all of these projects are for the technology's sake, and nobody has delivered something of value to business.
That just makes me
Completely
think
agree.
of the dot-com era.
Yes, exactly.
There's just
We'll
something
see.
about it that reminds me a little bit about where we are in the cycle with blockchain. I'm not a blockchain expert. However, I think that what you're saying is true, that making it practical and actionable and getting past the self-interest for that to occur, there's a long way to go.
There is a very, very long way to go. So from that point of view, the other hot topics like Diane, Karen, and David and I have been bringing up as far as like BI, business intelligence, forecasting, warehouse management systems, especially if you're in the e-commerce arena, and some of the automated equipment from there are much more practically oriented to being able to service your customer. And by the way, from an ERP standpoint, in e-commerce software is a must, especially if you have e-commerce type business, because otherwise you're just not going to be successful. So you better get on that bandwagon quite quickly. And there's usually some that go with the software, but IoT is prevalent because there's autonomous vehicles. They are making progress, and there's warehousing concepts and manufacturing concepts. But with that said, I'm going to bring up this topic here because it's especially prevalent even today, especially with all of our issues with Russia, and that is cyber attacks. I had a client that had a cyber attack last year, and they were down for a while, and they're still recovering in some respects. So that's a very serious problem, and this was not a po-bunk tiny client. So I don't know, has anyone on the panel want to comment on cyber? But I definitely know it's a problem.
I just think it's coming up more and more. It's going to come up even more as we get into 2022 and next year. It's like Lisa said, the clients I'm seeing, they're not small clients, and it ends up like kind of freezing your entire operations because you have to recover lost data. I mean, speaking of, we're floating in data and then we lose critical information. That's not good. But then you end up having to rebuild things that connections and kind of reworking some of these process improvements. On top of course, if you've lost information, how you rebuild that. So I think it's coming up more and more, and it's something to be taken serious.
Well, and I think it's leading people to the cloud. David, do you see people more and more going to the cloud as well?
Absolutely. But what I was going to say there is I'm about to release a podcast. So I'm starting to do some podcasting, and my very first recording, which is in the can, but we haven't actually released it yet, is with a cyber security expert. And he, when I was running the user group from one of the major ERP systems about 6 or 7 years ago. He came and delivered then. So this was 7 years ago. Delivered a presentation to that group talking about how the Russian mafia were using the cyber attacks to get into ERP systems and to set themselves up as a vendor and not to drain the bank account in one slice. They would set themselves up with small, and they were getting the drip feed from all of these different companies. So there's no question it is a major issue. Now, from a cloud or software as a service type scenario, there is an argument to say that people like Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, the big guys, can spend more on cybersecurity prevention than any particular individual client. So there is some proof to that. But having said that, we have seen Microsoft and those sorts of guys being taken down. So it is a risk management issue here, but it does come back to, which ERP vendor are you working with? How much of their revenue and so forth are they investing into these cyber prevention activities? Because I would potentially suggest that some of them are not doing a lot, because there's a lot in the mid tier. We all talk about the big boys, but there's a lot of products in the mid tier, and I would be questioning the quality of their prevention, because at the end of the day, those mid tier ones aren't as dear or aren't as expensive the investment in the cyber prevention has to come from somewhere, and if it's not,
right.
And if they don't have revenues and large revenues and large margins, the money's got to come from somewhere. So yes, it's a real issue.
Did the cyber experts say how long it takes these companies to recover on average from an attack?
I don't think there is an average. I had one of my clients attacked a while back, and they were out of business for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say a month, but a month is just to get like the basics back. And then I've seen that it lasts like 6 months to a year minimum to get like fully back, if you will.
So they didn't pay the ransom. They spun up a whole new set of servers in their environment where they had their servers in the names escape me for the moment, but they had to spin up a whole new environment and redeploy all of the software, and then rebuild all of the data again, and go back. And so they also lost that period of time because they knew they had a secure restore point here, but all of the transactions that occurred between there, they'd lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we actually just had another client.
Loss of invoicing, it's massive.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's happening more frequently. I just remembered another client that said it happened to them in the summer, I think. So it's definitely key. The other thing I'd throw out there, just because in an ERP selection client, it came up recently, is there's different kinds of clouds. Who knew? So there's like regular cloud, which is secure, but secure to what degree? And then there's government like clouds, which basically is like secure enough for like for government contracts kind of work, which is obviously more secure. So you obviously pay for that additional security, and it is overkill, supposedly, anyway, for the typical clients. But I don't know. We'll see over time whether that's really overkill, because it depends.
I've had that just recently. I helped a large organisation, Australian-based organisation, but they were servicing, their American division was servicing the Defence Department. So all of the things that we needed to do needed to pass the US Defence Department's criteria.
Very interesting.
Yep.
I think this whole conversation speaks to the necessity to think in advance again about, I'm going to call it necessary redundancy here. However that gets planned. There's the kind of redundancy in business that's actually dysfunctional that you want to stop. And then the cyber kind of redundancy is necessary so that you actually have backups when things may become problematic. I think organizations have to imagine and think in advance, this could happen, and not act like it can't.
Well, you bring up a really good point because it's very similar to a backup supplier. I mean, a backup supplier does you no good if you actually never use the backup supplier and they're not ready to back you up. So you have to do something on the, if your backup system is not ready to back you up, like it doesn't help.
So who tests that? Like, and that's one of the big issues is how many people actually restore this information. They all say, "Oh, we got a backup," but you got to restore it and make sure that it's viable and all that, those sorts of things. 100%.
Very, very. We could talk about this topic forever, but I know it's 5:00. So I'd like to just have if each of us could say, if we had to leave us with one thought, which I know is difficult because there's probably another 20 topics we could even bring up we haven't discussed today. So maybe we'll do future webinars on that. But one statement to leave us with, let's do that, and that'll wrap up the session. So, I don't know, David, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So the big one for me is to ensure that that you understand the culture of your business. All too often, these projects fail mostly because of human behavior, not necessarily because the technology doesn't work. The code will work and those sorts of things, right? So the reality is these things fail due to human behavior. And often executives don't want to acknowledge